Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from today. Some of you West Coast, some Central and East. I'm Diane Domeyer, Executive Director for the Creative Group. For those of you that may not be familiar with TCG, the Creative Group, we are a specialized staffing firm that places professionals in the areas of interactive, design, marketing, advertising, and public relations positions, both on a project as well as a full-time basis. In addition to providing those staffing services, we offer ongoing research, information, and resources on workplace trends, career tips, similar to our annual salary guide, Creative Team of the Future, which is a research project that we do each year about industry trends, as well as this series of BuzzBreak webinars. So our goal with these resources is to help creative professionals and companies to thrive and keep up with ongoing changes in the industry. I'm very excited today to introduce our BuzzBreak guest speaker, Stefan Mumma. Stefan will be sharing tips today for enhancing your ideation process and maximizing creativity. Clearly, in the creative industry, there is a continual need for innovation, and creatives must be able to come up with fresh ideas on the fly on a day-to-day basis, which is clearly not an easy task. When we did our research, we asked nearly 500 in-house and agency professionals to speak about their greatest barriers to employee creativity. And what they stated was that heavy workloads, tight deadlines, and business processes topped the list of blocking creativity. So staying inspired on the job is clearly no easy task. So we're thrilled today to have Stefan to help us overcome some of these obstacles and speak from his expertise on how to bring creativity into your day-to-day workplace. Before I turn it over to Stefan, I just want to go over a few housekeeping issues for those of you on the line with us today. Throughout the presentation today, you have the opportunity to be able to submit questions. You can do so in the Q&A box, which is in the webinar toolbox. At the end of today's presentation, we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. But in addition to that, we will be sending out a recording of today's presentation and any follow-up questions that we may not be able to address on today's webinar, we will address in our upcoming blog series. You can follow the conversation today and or join the conversation on Twitter by searching for the hashtag BuzzBreak. And you can also follow the Creative Group on Twitter at Creative Group. So with that, it is my true pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Stefan Mumma is the Creative Director and Purveyor of All That Rocks at Callahan Creek, a Kansas City-based ad agency. And so for those of you that may be wondering, the Purveyor of All That Rocks is a title given to Stefan not only by himself for his expertise, but more so from a previous student and co-author of a couple of his books. So Stefan has authored 6 books, the most recent being Creative Boot Camp, which is a 30-day crash course on creativity. Additional books include Caffeine for the Creative Team, Caffeine for the Creative Mind. And we chose Stefan today for his expertise, not necessarily because of his caffeine series, which is works very well with our 2014 salary guide theme, which was the salary barista. So great minds think alike, I guess. So Stefan has spoken at numerous creative industry gatherings over the years, including How Design Live, and has contributed to our TCG blog. So we're very excited to have him here today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Stefan and turn it over to you. So welcome today, Stefan. We're thrilled to have you.
Thanks, Diane. I really appreciate that. Webinars are always an interesting format because I can't see any of you, so I'm just going to naturally assume every one of my jokes are landing, and you guys are laughing and finding me hilarious at the same time. So if you're not, please don't tell me, or else I'll kind of take it personal, and I end up getting in a very depressive state, and I'll end up on the top of a roof someplace. So, what we're going to talk about today, as you can see from the screen, we are going to talk about 8 creative battles, and these 8 battles come from personal experience as well as research that I've done on creativity and the creative process. Today we're going to be talking a lot about creativity and the battles that we all face when it comes to being our creative best. We're going to be also doing a creative exercise about halfway through this webinar, so hopefully you have some paper and something to write with. Once we get to that exercise, just about everything I do includes a creative exercise. If anyone has Caffeine for the Creative Mind or Caffeine for the Creative Team, you know between the 2 books there's about 400 little creative exercises that are in those books. And I use them as teaching tools. I use them as sort of illustrations for certain points. And we're going to do one today that's going to be a little 3-minute exercise that I often like to give during these types of webinars, these types of talking opportunities, speaking opportunities, just so you guys are actually practicing creativity while we're talking about it and kind of get that feeling while we're doing it. So I start off everything I do that's in the creative realm talking about what creativity is. Because I could ask you a question right now. I could ask you, what is the definition of creativity? And I can guarantee I would get back dozens, if not hundreds, of different answers to what creativity is. It's one of those terms, one of those words that we really don't know exactly what it is. And we struggle with that definition when someone says, what does it mean to be creative? And oftentimes I believe that what we believe is creativity really isn't. And if we understand what creativity is at its core, at its foundation, then we can find out certain truths not only about what creativity is, but how we can participate in a creative endeavor. We also find out as we go through this process that every one of us are creative, and not in that kindergarten teacher, Mr. Rogers, everyone gets a medal type of everyone's creative, but really it's the fact that you practice creativity regardless of what your job title is, because you have a job, you are creative, and I'll kind of get into what that is. So I had struggled with what creativity was as I was coming up. I graduated in 1996 from Chapman University with a degree in communication arts. I am a designer, and I came up as a designer. And if someone asked me back then when I graduated, what is creativity, I was going to say it was attached uniquely to art. I think most of us believe that. And I couldn't give you what that actual definition is, but I knew that when I would design something, I felt like I was being creative. But also when I painted something, I felt like I was being creative. Or when I drew something, I felt like I was being creative. I knew that when I would work on my car, I wasn't being creative, at least it didn't feel like it. Or when something at home broke and I fixed it, I wasn't being creative, I was doing something else. And so I started studying what creativity was. And when I started interviewing not only designers, but artists and writers, and then started talking to engineers and scientists, and I started coming up with a very different interpretation of what creativity is. At its core, creativity is problem solving. That's it. So I think we want it to be more because we want it to be mysterious. We want it to be able to kind of live out in the ether because we can't define it. So as long as we can't define it, we can live with that. But the reality is, creativity is problem solving, but it has 2 characteristics. Creativity is problem solving with relevance and novelty. That's the true definition of what it is. So relevance is the degree by which a problem is solved, because we can often try to solve a problem and come up with a solution, but it's not really a solution because it's not solving the problem. Novelty is the degree of uniqueness or originality that solution possesses. So think about the work that you do, every single one of you solve problems for a living. If you break down your job into its very basic core, it will almost always come back to problem solving. That's why you get paid. That's why someone gives you money, to solve some element, some problem in some specific way. And so you, because of the work that you do, are already creative. You're creative every day. You were creative the moment that you got up this morning, because the moment you got up this morning, you had a problem to solve. You put your feet over the edge of the bed, turned off your alarm, and at that moment, your problem was, I need to go to the bathroom. So how do I get from my bed to the bathroom in order to solve this problem? And you solved it in an incredibly relevant way. Most of you stood up and walked to the bathroom. But that's not the only way to solve that problem. You could have barrel rolled the whole way to the bathroom. You could have got down on your hands and knees and crawled there. You could have somehow detached the bathroom and pulled it towards you. So all those are silly, but they are still solutions to that particular problem. And every day you are confronted with hundreds of thousands of small problems. And in those small problems, you have developed routine in order to solve them without thinking. My coach called that muscle memory. And from a muscle memory means that I don't have to consciously think about solving a problem. I just do. The reality is the problem that you solve every single day constantly is, I need air to live. So I have to breathe in and breathe out. But you don't think about it. Your body just does it. That's muscle memory. But you're solving a problem in that moment, a problem that comes to the surface very quickly when you jump in a pool. And you can no longer rely on that muscle memory to solve your problem anymore. So you can see that we're constantly confronted with problems to solve. And creativity is simply solving those problems with relevance, you have to solve them, and novelty. How unique or different is that solution? Now, I'm a creative director at an ad agency, and so the problems that my designers and my writers and my creative team get are problems from our clients. How do I sell more product? How do I make people more aware of my brand? And every day they're given a problem to solve, and they can choose to solve it relevantly. Hey, if all I want to do is make people aware, all I have to say is this brand exists, and I can put that on an ad and send it out. Technically, they solve the problem, but it's not terribly novel. Relevant, but not novel. So if that truly is the definition of what creativity is, there are some byproducts to it. And those byproducts, one of the most significant byproducts to it, is that creativity is no longer a talent. It's a skill. Because problem solving can be practiced. So if you practice something, if you want to get better at something, you practice it. If you want to learn how to play guitar, you have to pick up a guitar and practice it, and you'll get better at it because it's a skill. So if creativity is a skill, then you can train yourself to get better. It becomes immediately trainable and growable and improvable and measurable. And creativity is something we've never thought was measurable. How do you measure how creative something is? If it's a skill, we should be able to measure it, which is a really interesting idea. How do we measure creativity? That's a different webinar for a different time. But if we're talking about what creativity is and I can get better at it, all I have to do is practice. So like anything, the more I practice, the more that I create the habit in my life. Creativity is a habit. That it's something that we do. It's a process. And if we make it a positive habit in our lives, then we will improve at it naturally. We'll get better at it. Over the course of time, we will train ourselves to generate ideas in greater quantity and quality. And as it is with any habit that you try to create, you are actually altering behavior. And that sounds really easy to do, but take any habit in our life that we've tried to break, and we know how difficult it is to alter behavior. Altering behavior sounds wonderful, and we think that we can just simply make a decision and alter that behavior forever. But it doesn't work that way. There are physiological things that are occurring inside of that habit that keep us from doing so. Ask yourself, anyone who's ever tried to start an exercise routine, if you don't exercise, and January 1st comes, which is the time everyone goes, you know what, I'm going to start exercising. And you say to yourself, no, I'm going to do it this time. I'm going to go to the gym. What do? You go to the gym. You might go to the gym for 2 weeks. You might go to the gym for 3 weeks. But then something happens. other things in your life start taking over, and you weren't able to establish that habit in a way where it became muscle memory, in a way where it became just a natural part of your day, natural part of your week. If you've ever tried to quit smoking or stop drinking soda, all of those things end up being struggles. Even though in your mind you've said, I want to do this thing, I am resolved to it, the reality is there are habit killers in our lives that keep us from either instilling positive habits or removing negative habits. And sometimes those are routines, other routines. Sometimes they're other habits. Sometimes they're external sources, other forces that kind of come into our lives and change the way that we view that habit, kind of shake up our mentality. It becomes harder and harder to establish it. So if we want to make creativity a habit in our lives, if we want to solve problems with more relevance and more novelty over the course of time, and we really want to develop a habit doing it, we have to understand what battles we're going to face. That's how you physically alter any behavior. It's the part that's missing when we have New Year's resolution, because we just say to ourselves, I'm going to do this thing, but we don't take the time to recognize what's going to get in my way, what's going to try to stop me from instilling this habit in my life, or what's going to try to derail me from stopping this habit in our lives. What happens? We don't plan for those things. So when they hit us, we just react naturally to them and we give in to them. But if we know what battles are coming, if we know what hurdles we have to overcome, if we know what types of things are going to be introduced into our lives, starting a good habit or stopping a bad one is easier because we've already prepared ourselves for when that hurdle comes. We've already recognized that it's going to be a problem, and we've already told ourselves how we're going to overcome it when it arrives. So if we want to make creativity a habit, we have to understand which battles are coming in this habit of solving problems with greater relevance and novelty. If you're in any industry that uses art and copy, whether you're a designer or a writer or a marketer, whether if you use art and copy to solve problems, then there are significant battles that come into place that, frankly, you have very little control of. There are political battles that come into place. There are psychological battles that come into place that you don't control what happens in those situations. For instance, you might want to be as creative as you know you can be, but your creative director is a little more conservative, or, as is mainly the case, your client is much more conservative than what you would like to be. But if you look at creativity as problem solving and not as art, you'll discover that you can take into account that restriction and solve that problem in the same way that you would solve it in any other way. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about 8 creative battles, 8 things that have popped up and that continually pop up in your habit-building practice of solving problems with greater relevance and novelty. And so we're going to talk about what to do in each of those battles. And each of these battles are presented as sort of a versus, a mono, e-mono type of thing. So let's get into each of these battles. Number 1, pushed forward versus pulled back. So as adults, as people who are employed and have a job and have been doing it for a while, adults excel at relevance. We can solve a problem incredibly relevantly, and we do it all the time. As a matter of fact, we've become accustomed to solving problems at their bare minimum. Whatever solves the problem at its minimum, I will allow that to happen and then go about my day because I have other problems to solve. It's tough to focus on the one problem and solve it novelly when I have 27 problems to solve. We don't look at it as individual problems. We look at them as a package of problems I have to solve in any particular day. But if we want to be more creative, the ideas that we generate have to include an element of novelty to them. And if you think about it, most of the ideas that we generate are actually quite ordinary. They're normal ideas to solving a problem because that's what we have trained ourselves to do. That's what we become accustomed to doing. Why solve something elaborately if I can solve it simply? So we've become accustomed to doing so. The problem is there are times when we want more novelty in our solution. For instance, if we're generating ideas for a logo or a marketing campaign or a party theme, whatever the case is, we might want more novelty in those solutions, but yet we haven't practiced it. Most of the ideas that we generate on a regular basis have to be pushed forward in order to be novel. They have to be pushed forward really to be any good. So we have two choices to make at the beginning of any ideation session. Anytime that we're trying to solve a problem, we can choose to generate the ordinary ideas and try to push them forward into extraordinary, or we could choose to start with the extraordinary and pull those ideas back. We could choose to start with the absurd. If we could solve it the most absurd way to solve it, how would we solve that problem? And then pull that idea back into relevancy. And I'll give you an example. We were throwing around ideas for a client. It was a tennis-related client. And they had come to us for the worst project an ad agency can ever get, which is create for us a viral video, as if we have some magic viral button that we can control what is viral. All we can do is recognize what type of content do people typically share, and then try to make that. The problem is the type of content that people typically share isn't usually the type of content that a brand wants attached to them. So we're generating ideas on what kind of video content we can create for this tennis-related client. And we sit down in a session, and I run an exercise. We get done with the exercise, and we start throwing out ideas. And the first idea that comes out on the table is Naked Tennis Guy. Naked Tennis Guy was this idea to have a tennis player who have a guy with two tennis rackets and a tennis ball, and he's naked, and he's running up to people on the street and challenging them to tennis matches over the center median of the street. And we would film it just to see what people's reactions would be. Now, clearly, we can't really do that. I mean, I guess we could. We could probably get 2 or 3 interactions in before we get arrested. But, and the client wouldn't want to attach themselves to that type of content anyway. But what that idea was too far. That idea was too absurd. But what that idea led to, when you pull back that idea, was G-string tennis guy. And that we did. We put a guy in a sequin G-string and ran him around. If you've ever been to Kansas City, we have an area called the Plaza, which is like the outdoor shopping area. And we had him challenging people to tennis matches across the center median. And we filmed it, and it was absolutely hilarious. And that did, in the broadest definition of whatever viral really means, accomplish our goal. It was relevant, novel content. So in that particular instance, we came up with the absurd and pulled it back, versus starting with the ordinary and trying to push it forward. And the ideas that you generate, what would be the most absurd? And could you take that absurdity and pull it back from a novelty standpoint into something more relevant? So this is the first battle. Second battle is artistic versus creative. And this was born from a definition of creativity that I thought I knew, that there is that creative is artistic, that creativity and artistry are connected. But the reality is that creativity, if creativity is problem solving, that means it's not artistic at all. That those two ideas are completely separate. They're completely different ideas. You can be creative and artistic, but they are not one and the same. So when you look at yourself and you say, I'm not creative, in most cases when someone says they're not creative, what they're really saying is they're not artistic. They can't draw or paint, or they can't write music or play. In those instances, it's not because they're really not creative, it's because they're not artistic. So when we start thinking of creativity and removing artistry from the equation, we can begin to see how everyone is creative. What also comes into play in this particular instance is if creativity is problem design and artistry is removed from it, if creativity is problem design, or is problem solving, then problem design becomes incredibly important. Most of the time when I'm getting back ordinary solutions from my creatives, it isn't because they don't have the capacity to generate more creative ideas. It's because they're solving the wrong problem. That I haven't given them a problem that they can alter and change and grab a handle on and solve it creatively. So problem design, how we frame problems, how we design the problems, and how we communicate that design becomes incredibly important to our ability to be more creative. Unfortunately, we get so caught up in the artistry of what we make that we forget that if you can take a problem, the same problem, and simply phrase it a different way, and people will understand it better. And we've all had those instances when we didn't understand something, and we've asked someone, hey, listen, I don't get this, I don't understand this, can you explain it to me? And they frame the problem a different way, and you go, oh, okay, I get it. There's simply a rearranging of what that problem can be. So oftentimes when we want to be more creative, the battle that we face is that the problem that we're solving needs to be fundamentally changed. Something small, and it can be altered, and I can generate more ideas. What I typically do here as a creative director is I'll go through the problem-solving aspect, and we'll start generating ideas. And if I'm not feeling like we're getting into that novel space, I will change the problem just a little bit so that they have something new to solve. So if I'm saying, for instance, we were talking about that tennis concept about coming up with a video. If the ideas that I was getting wasn't very novel, I might go, okay, hold on. What if it wasn't a video? What if it was a series of posters? What would you do if it was posters? And then they would generate ideas for posters. Well, that's not the problem we were given, but inside of them solving that problem, I might be able to sort of do an end around. I might be able to take an idea that came up with a poster and convert it and change it and alter it into more of a video environment. So all I'm doing is I'm altering the problem a little bit. So in the battles that you face, first and foremost, remove artistry from your creative equation. You can use art to be creative, but art is about creating beauty. Creativity is about problem solving. So remove it from the scenario and then discuss what the problem should be or could be, and then can you change that problem? That's number 2. Number 3, present versus aware. In our jobs, all of us are present, but all of us have also experienced times when we have been in a meeting and we've been sitting at that meeting table and we are completely spacing out. We are looking out the window, probably what you're doing right now. You're looking out the window and you're thinking about something else. You're present, but you're not really aware. What ends up happening with this idea of present versus aware, this is the battle of routine. Routines, from a creative coaching standpoint, we talk about routines a lot. And most people will frame routines as being evil. And routines really aren't evil. They are the enemy of creativity, but not because they're evil. We need routine in our lives. There's no possible way that we can consciously think about every problem we have to solve. If we did, we'd be thinking about every single breath we took, and then we would have very little brain activity to solve anything else. So routines are there in a positive way, but they can also hurt us creatively. And all of us have generated certain routines. You drive the same way to work. You sit at the same desk. You have the same morning routine. You do the same things over and over and over again. So if you want to become more aware of your surroundings, you're going to have to break that routine. I could ask you right now to close your eyes, and I could ask you in almost every situation, if you sit at a desk, you have a cup of pen. So I want you, just for fun, close your eyes and imagine you're sitting at your desk, whether you actually are or not. Imagine you're sitting at your desk. Now reach out for your cup of pen. You know exactly where they're at because they're in the same place every single day. But have you ever really looked at your cup of pen? I interviewed a woman named Margot Chase. She's a designer out of LA. And she had a design that she had done for an album cover. And it was a profile of the artist that was done in scribbles, little circles, just like a pen, like a ballpoint pen scribbles. And I asked her, what was the inspiration for that particular design? And she said, well, I was trying to come up with some unique technique to use for this particular album cover. And I went to reach for a pen, and I knocked it over. And when I picked up my pen cup, I looked in the bottom of the pen cup, and there were all these swirls in the bottom of the pen cup from all the pens that had been put down there. And that gave her the inspiration to produce that particular album cover. How many of us have ever looked in the bottom of our pen cups? How much inspiration is sitting around us right now that we have basically become blind to because of routine? And so if you are battling this idea of routine, you are in control of routine. Change it. Drive home a different way tonight. Go to lunch with different people. Change the way your desk looks. Alter your desktop pattern. Sit someplace else. Alter all of your routines. Take one day and pick a routine and say, I'm going to take this routine and change it today. And then tomorrow pick a completely different routine. And just constantly change your routine. And what you'll find is that you are more aware as well as present in your everyday. That's number 3. Let's go to number 4. Freedom versus restriction. You know, from a creative standpoint, if you ask most creatives, and certainly if you ask young creatives, and I fell right into this camp when I first came out of school, what's the one thing that you need more of in order to be more creative? And I would say most young creatives will say more freedom. I need more freedom to be more creative. I need more budget. I need more time. I need more leeway conceptually. I need more permission. In each of those instances, what they're saying is I need more freedom. But here's the reality. If creativity is problem solving, then more freedom makes creativity harder, not easier. Because if you have more freedom, that means that your problem is broader and it becomes harder to solve. If you want to be more creative, try the opposite of freedom. Give yourself more restriction, because it's those restrictions that are actually making you creative. It's even how we judge creativity. It's how we measure it. If I said, hey, listen, you've got 6 months, and I want you to redesign the logo for your company, and you can have as much money as you want. You can have, frankly, you don't even have to have 6 months. You can have a year. And you come back after a year, and you have the monogram of the company name knocked out in a black box. That solution is not very creative, is it? It's not very novel. It's relevant, but it's not very novel. And you have to have both in order to be creative. But if I said, oh, man, I totally forgot to tell you, I volunteered you to redesign the logo for the company. And the president of the company, he's right there about 10 feet away. He'll be at your desk in 4 seconds. And you sit down and you knock out the logo, the letters of the company out of a black box and show the president. That solution, the exact same solution, just became infinitely more creative because of the restriction of time, a ridiculous restriction. So we actually judge creativity by that restriction. We can look at a piece of work and go, oh, that's nice. And then the person says, I did that. I only had a $5 budget. You go, wow. Well, now that solution is really good because more restriction got added to it. Nothing else has fundamentally changed with it. So if we want to be more creative, we have to add more restriction. So I'm going to prove this here for a second. This is where we're going to do our little exercise, okay? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to get a pen and a paper, and we're going to do this exercise, okay? This exercise is called Medieval Happy Meal. The Happy Meal has become a staple of fast food shops worldwide. A miniaturized helpless meal for children is accompanied by a cheap, useless toy that could be better. In 1979, marked the first Happy Meal offering, and parents have been stepping on the equivalent of plastic ninja stars ever since. But what if we wanted to take that date and move it back a few hundred years? Let's find out. Your task is to document as many Happy Meal toys as you can conjure for a slightly older era medieval times. We're talking knights, horses, and castles, the whole 9 yards. You are charged with writing as many possible medieval times Happy Meal toys as you can, and I'm only going to give you 3 minutes to do it. So, if Happy Meals were around during medieval times, what could or would be in those boxes as possible toys? So here's what you're going to do. I'm going to give you 3 minutes, and I want you to write down as many possible toy ideas as you can in those 3 minutes, okay? So here we go. You got your paper, you got your pencil. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Ready? Go. This is the awkward part of our webinar where you have 3 minutes and you're doing a thing and I'm still talking. So I'm going to kind of give you where you're at on time as we go. And hopefully you're making your list of Happy Meal toys as we speak. So 30 seconds have gone by. I feel like I should be humming the Jeopardy theme or something while you guys are generating ideas. Happy Meal toys. If Happy Meals were around during medieval times, what would or could be in those boxes? 1 minute has passed. You have 2 minutes left. 1 minute has passed. You have 2 minutes left. One minute has passed. Now, your assignment here is toys, but I even start to wonder what would be a Happy Meal for kids in medieval times, like mutton chops or something. All right, you're halfway. Minute 30. You're halfway. You're halfway. I wonder what the drive-up window would look like. And what you would drive up. I guess a horse or an ox or something. All right, 2 minutes have passed. You have 1 minute left. 1 minute left. One minute left. Getting harder, isn't it? All right, you got 30 seconds. 30 seconds left. 30 seconds. You got 15 seconds. You got a few more and you go. And time. All right, stop writing, you cheaters. All right, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to count up how many ideas you have, and I want you to write it at the top of your paper. Count up how many ideas you have and write it at the top of your paper. Okay. So, obviously I'm not there with you, so I can't ask you how many ideas you came up with, but there's a very good chance you came up with more than 10. Some of you came up with more than 20. There will even be some of you that came up with more than 30. I've had more than 40. The most I've ever had is 54, but they were in two-person teams. But I want you to think about it. Even if you have 10 or 20 ideas, you have 10 or 20 ideas. In 3 minutes, you generated 10, 20, 30 ideas for a problem in just 3 minutes. And yet we'll get in a room for an hour and a half and we'll walk out with 3 or 4 ideas. Why is that? What is it about the process that we struggle with? Well, one of the things that we did here, the most obvious thing is the problems that you're asked to solve aren't medieval Happy Meals, which is a much easier problem to solve and a much more fun problem to solve. But one of the things that we did here was something called time boxing. Time boxing is an ideation technique where you give people a small amount of time in which to ideate, and because you're assigning a very restrictive environment, people focus for that 3 minutes and they give you more because of the restriction. If I would have said, go away and come back tomorrow with a list of Happy Meal ideas, odds are you would have created maybe a little bit more than what you have. But because of your own processes, you would have went out and gone, you know what, 10's enough. 10 Happy Meal toys is enough. But in 3 minutes, I said, keep going, and you guys generated more and more and more because I gave you a bigger restriction. So when we're looking at how to be more creative and we really think that we want more freedom, the reality is we need more restriction. And here's the hard part. If you don't have enough restriction, you have to add more. And that's the hardest part for a creative to do. We don't want to add more restriction. We want to remove it. But if we're given 2 weeks to do a job that we only need 3 days to do, when do we start that job? 3 days before it's due. Some of you probably said 2 days before it's due. Because we want the restriction. We need the restriction of time. So, number 5, effort versus value. Effort versus value. There is a reality to creativity, and that it is an extinguishable well. Creativity takes energy to solve problems, and we only have so much of it. So in most cases, we are paid to solve problems for other people. So if you work in an agency, as a design firm, frankly, you work in any business, you most likely have clients or you have customers. So really, you're solving problems for them. And when you're solving problems for them, there are certain restrictions that come with that. One of those is money. Another is time. Some of it is education and understanding. But all of those equal a cost. There is a cost to solving problems. There is a cost to creativity. And what we have to figure out is what is the true value of the idea. Does the idea that we are generating, is it worthy to be fought for? Because as creatives, we're really good at fighting. We have an idea and we fall in love with it, and so we fight for that idea. And I'm not saying not to fight for your ideas. I'm saying know which ideas are worthy of the battle. Because if you fight for every single idea that you have, then you are going to burn, and you're going to burn quick. You can't possibly fight every single time, because every time you fight, you're exhausting energy that needs to go into the creative process. So you have to ask yourself, the amount of effort that I'm going to have to not only generate this idea but see it through, is it worth the value in cost? Is it going to be as effective as I think it's going to be and needs to be? And is this the job? Is this the problem that's worth that effort? Because we have this misconception about really creative ideas. We think that creativity sells itself, and it doesn't. Mediocrity sells itself. Creativity needs to be sold. People need to, when people see something new, they need to be told why that thing that's so new and novel matters. If it's mediocre, if they understand it, if everybody gets it, then you don't have to sell that. But you do have to sell creativity. You do have to sell really great ideas. In order to do that, it's going to take effort, and you have to decide for yourself, is this the battle I'm willing to go for? And if it is, then battle it all the way to the end. Number 6, motivation versus inspiration. So one of the reasons why it was so easy for you to generate 10, 20, 30 ideas for Medieval Happy Meal is because you were inspired to do so. You were motivated by the time that we had, but we oftentimes will take those two things and put them together. When we say we can't be creative, when we're not at our creative best, we say that we're not inspired. I'm not inspired to be my creative best. I don't have any inspiration. I'm looking for inspiration. But the reality is what you're most likely looking for is motivation. You were motivated to do this. Why can't you generate 30 or 20 or 30 ideas for every project you have? Because you're not motivated to do so. It's not a matter of inspiration. Inspiration is an outward-in activity. Inspiration is something else inspiring me from the outside. Motivation, on the other hand, is an inward-out activity. You control your own motivation. You could choose to be just as motivated on your project as you were on Medieval Happy Meal. You can choose to do that, but you don't. Routine mostly takes away that motivation. But the good news is the good news, bad news thing. If most of the time it's not an inspiration problem but a motivation problem, you're in complete control of that. That's also the bad news. That means that you can no longer blame somebody else. You can no longer blame a lack of inspiration. It's on you. It's on you to go out and motivate yourself to solve the problems that you're fighting. So know this. In most cases, you're in control of your own motivation. So if you're struggling with generating ideas because you don't think you're inspired, be motivated to go find your inspiration. The story about Margot Chase, she found inspiration in the bottom of her pen cup, sitting right there on her desk. What's around you right now that could inspire you, and are you motivated to go look? Number 7, input versus output. Because creativity is an extinguishable well of energy, we often spend most of our time as creatives outputting. You're paid to output. You're paid to create things for other people. In most cases, it's your boss, it's your business, it's your agency, your company that's creating things for clients and customers. You make and you output. But know that it's an extinguishable well. You only have so much. What most creatives forget to do is input. What are you taking in to feed it? What are you feeding yourself to give you that great output? You know, as you get older, as I have gotten older, I have spent less and less time inputting because I have mistakenly believed that my experience acts as input, that my history is input, that I can call upon things that happened 15 years ago and use them in my work. But all creatives, anyone who makes, anyone who outputs, needs input. So what are you doing to input? And, you know, in most cases we'll often say, well, my employer doesn't allow me to input. And we have all of these ways that we think that we can go be inspired and input. I can go to museums and I can go to conferences. And those things are inspiring and they are great input. But there are things, small things that you can do every day. You can take a walk. You can read a magazine. You can look at other work. You can get away from the work that you're doing and engage yourself in some other creative work in order to input. But don't forget, you cannot be an output machine. There's no possible way for you to only output. You will only output what you input. So don't forget about what you bring in. Number 8, consequence versus permission. You know, there should be an inherent consequence to the work that you do. Because if you are truly generating novel ideas, then that newness, part of a characteristic of novelty, innate to what novelty is failure, that you are going to fail. If you are in a job right now, if you are in work right now and you are not failing, at least in some small way, then you are not generating anything novel. Because if you're not failing, no one can succeed at novelty without there being some element of failure. And we all say we would fail more often, we'd take more chances, we'd take more risks if there wasn't a consequence attached to it. It's not the risk that bothers us, it's the consequence of the risk. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to have these giant failures. I'm not asking you to have giant failures. I'm asking you to have small little failures in your processes, for you to try things out and give yourself the permission to fail at them, whether that's a new technique, whether that's a new idea, whether that's a new process. You have to work that into your own creative process in a small way early in the process where you can absorb the failure and still be able to react, because every once in a while you're not going to fail. You're going to succeed, and that success is now going to introduce something new and wonderful in the world. And if you want to have that experience more, you have to give yourself the permission to fail and work failure into your process early and often. Okay, those are the 8 battles that we face. I'm going to leave you with a story about a man who understood these creative battles, and that, in my opinion, one of the greatest creatives of all time, and that was Walt Disney. Walt Disney had a very unique creative process, very unique brainstorming process. So Walt would actually conduct brainstorming sessions in 3 separate rooms over the course of 2 days to solve a single problem. So the first room was his idea room, and it was this big room with high ceilings, and he would put seats in a circle, and he would have 10, 12 seats in a circle. And everybody would be throwing out ideas. He would have a chalkboard on wheels, and he would write down all of these ideas as people were throwing them out in this circle. And the reason why he had the circle was that he wanted everybody, regardless of their position, to feel like they were equal in this moment, that everyone was completely capable of generating ideas. And then he would take that when the session was over, he would take that chalkboard into a smaller room that he would call the funnel room. And what he would do is he would take that and he would put seats in a semicircle, maybe 7 or 8 seats in a semicircle, and he would put the chalkboard at the front of the semicircle. And the goal of this was to start talking about which ideas had merit and which didn't. So he would be funneling down these ideas. So he would get 2 or 3 possible solutions. And then he would take that chalkboard out, and he would take that chalkboard into a very small room. It was called the kill room. And this little itty-bitty room that was very compact, he would put 3 chairs in a straight line. And then he would put he would take in the chalkboard with those 3 ideas. And their job at that moment was to focus on those ideas and try to kill them. What could possibly happen with this idea? What could go right? What could go wrong? Which one of these 3 things is going to be the one we leave this room with? And that would happen over the course of 2 or 3 days. Now I want you to think about your own creative process. In most cases, you take that exact same process that Walt Disney took, and you shove it into about 45 minutes into a boardroom. And you try to do all of those things all at once. You try to generate the ideas, funnel them down, and kill them as people are saying them, as they're speaking them. But what we have to remember about creativity is that creativity is a process, that it's not a bolt of lightning, it's not this strike of brilliance. That's part, that can be part, but the reality is creativity is a process. It takes time. And when we cheat the process, we find out what happens. Go look at your medieval Happy Meal ideas. Go look at the list of ideas. If you look at the list of ideas and I asked you, I want you to list off the first 5 or 6 ideas. Most of you, if you could hear one another across the United States, you're going to have really similar ideas in your first 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 ideas. You're going to have those ones that everyone thinks of. And if you think about what we normally do, we go into a room, we generate 5 or 6 ideas, and then we leave the room. The same 5 or 6 ideas that everyone has when they solve that same problem. But if you look at the remainder of your list, there are really interesting ideas farther down your list. It usually happens after you've come up with a really unique, stupid, absurd idea and went, oh, okay, all right, so now we can start coming up with really unusual ideas. It's not that the bottom of your list is more interesting or novel than the top. It's as a whole, there is more novelty in the second half of your list than there is at the beginning of your list, because you have to get those ideas out and you have to let the process play. Remember, creativity is a process, and if you cheapen the process, then you're going to be fighting these battles every single time. Recognize the importance of the process and let it play out. This is my contact information. If you're interested in finding me, you can find me creativebootcamp.com, which goes along with the last book, chasingthemonsteridea.com, which if you're in advertising, it's a book about monster marketing ideas. There's my social environment. If you want to try to find me socially, you can find me at those places. I want to thank you guys for the time that you've given me. And now I believe we're going to go into some Q&A.
Stefan, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic, and I'm certain that our audience today is feeling both motivated and inspired by your tips to be able to face the battles of creativity. So a couple of things. We do have a few minutes here for Q&A. If anyone has any additional questions, we have several already. You can use the Q&A box in the toolbar to submit any questions. I also wanted to point out that in your resources, in addition to those provided by Stefan today, the Creative Group can assist you with additional resources. We just published a new report called Innovation in the House, Creativity Lessons from 5 Top In-House Creative Teams. That's a part of our Creative Team of the Future program, and it's filled with useful tips for sparking innovation with leaders from Disney's Yellow Shoes Creative Group, McKesson, National Parks, Square, and Target. You can download it for free at creativegroup.com/CTF. We've also listed in the resource section, which you will find in the widget, access where you can find the TCG blog as well as our social media channels. And we will post a recording of today's webcast on our blog after the event. So a few questions. Okay, so one question, Chris, as you speak about relevance and novelty as you kicked off today, and you're a great example of the tennis, clearly novelty and relevance, and it kind of calls to mind even the most recent ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, right? So clearly a novel idea with relevance to solve the challenge of raising funds and awareness. But how do you know that it's relevant to the audience, right? Like using both of those examples. It's relevant to solve the problem, but when you're taking those kind of risks, is there any way to measure relevance to the audience you're trying to reach?
Yeah, I think there are certain steps that you take from a strategic standpoint when you're dealing with this idea of relevance. Most of the time the problems that we solve aren't actually for us. We're not part of our own audiences. But we do share something with every audience that we generate work for, and that's we're human. We are human, they are human. So the first question you have to ask yourself is does this idea, is it relevant to me? Do I see value in it? Would it alter my behavior? In most cases, we create work to alter someone's behavior. We want them to buy a product. We want them to subscribe to a service or become aware of a cause. In every instance, we're generating work to alter behavior. We think it's about communication, but really, the communication is meant to drive some action. So when you think about the idea of behavior and how we can alter behavior, you have to ask yourself, would this idea that I have, first and foremost, would it alter my behavior? Is there something within it that makes me look at my own view and perspective of what I know of that particular subject? And would it first alter my perspective? Now, again, we're not usually the audience, but because we're human, we can take a very human approach to it. Secondarily to that is that you have to ask yourself, what am I willing to do? What lengths am I willing to go to find out who my audience is? And in most cases, we're solving problems for other people. And because that's the case, we get a creative brief or a strategy brief. We get some piece of paper. And we do some level of research on our own. All right, let me see. This says the audience is a demographic of 35 to 54-year-old women. Well, you can just take and accept that demographic, or you can spend some time really thinking about 35 to 54-year-old women and how different a 35-year-old woman thinks to what a 54-year-old woman thinks. You have to get past the demographic, and you have to choose, when we talk about effort versus value, to what degree you're willing to go out and find out for yourself what people think inside of your audience group. So as creators, as makers, we think our only job is simply to make things and then go away. But how many of us have actually followed what we've made to see how effective it's been? How many of us have done the pre-research necessary to know that the ideas that we're generating will have merit to somebody? And so go out and get away from your desk and speak to someone. Bring your audience in and talk to them and ask them what would be effective for them, what would motivate them, what would be relevant to them. So part of this is energy, part of it is human behavior.
That's terrific. Now, Stefan, we have time probably for one more question. What are some, as you talk about creating restriction, what are some good ways to provide self-restriction in open-ended projects when the restriction isn't imposed?
Yeah, you can choose to do it at any stage of the creative process. The most universal restriction is time. That's the one that there's nothing we can do about, and it's the one that we can choose whether or not we want to give ourselves. A project changes very, very drastically, and our entire creative process changes when we break out the creative process and then alter the amount of time that we give ourselves to do something. So you might say, I'm going to come up with an idea. I want to come up with 3 ideas for a brochure design. So you can say, I'm going to just come up with 3 ideas. I've got 2 weeks. Or you can say, I'm going to come up with 1 idea, and I'm going to take 2 hours to draw it out. I'm going to take 3 hours to build it. And so you're giving yourself the restriction of time so that you are relying on that time to drive you. But there are other motivating factors. One of those is budget. How much money do you have? What resources do you have? And the more that you strip away, the more you're going to find you're going to become more and more creative. When we were in college as designers, we didn't have budgets. So we had to make things out of stuff. We had to shoot videos on our phone. We had to do mock-ups with cardboard and paper that we could find, and we became incredibly resourceful. Resourcefulness is a quality that I'm seeing less and less of in the creative industry. People are becoming less and less resourceful because they believe the technology will help them get over whatever humps they need. But you're finding the people that are able to use technology and become resourceful in doing so are creating incredibly novel pieces. So when we deal with the idea of restriction, time is the easiest. But inside of each of our projects and our own processes, there are milestones along the way that we can set our own restriction, whatever that is. I'm going to work with this person and I'm going to come up with something, or I'm going to do my own writing for this particular project, or I'm not going to do it in 4-color, I'm going to do it in 2-color. If I only had 2-color, what would this look like? So you can give yourself either design restrictions, writing restrictions. I'm going to do this in 2 paragraphs. You can give yourself photography restrictions. I'm only going to shoot this from the ground going up. So whatever our job is, we can instill those own restrictions into our process.
Well, with that restriction, Stefan, unfortunately the restriction of time, we have run out of time, but I do want to thank you and thank all of you for joining us today. If you submitted a question, we did not have an opportunity to answer that. As I said earlier, we will be posting a recording of this webcast, and we will be doing follow-up discussions on our blog, where we will address many of the questions that have been answered. So, Stefan, thank you very much for joining us, and thanks for your valuable insights. We really appreciate it. For those on the line today, if you have any additional questions, feel free, of course, and you want to learn about trends in the industry, to look at the resources provided, but also to feel free to get in touch with our local office for the creative group nearest you. So with that, we'll conclude today's Buzz Break. Have a great rest of the day, and thank you again, Stefan, for a fantastic session.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.